My name's Natalie, I'm 31. And my family didn't even notice when I moved to another state. Not one call. Not one text. A year later, they suddenly messaged me, asking if I'll come to my brother's wedding. The same brother who forgot my birthday 3 years in a row. I'm still deciding if I should go, or let my silence speak for me. Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories about family, heartbreak, and emotional courage. I didn't plan to leave that morning. Just happened. One moment I was sitting at the kitchen table, watching sunlight spill across the same scratches on the same surface I'd stared at for years. The next, I was folding my life into 2 worn-out suitcases. I didn't write a note. I didn't send a text. I didn't even close the back door softly, because after 31 years of being invisible, I realized silence was the only language my family ever understood. The house smelled like yesterday's coffee and the faint lemon cleaner my mom used every Sunday. I could almost hear her voice calling my brother's name from upstairs, asking him to help her move something heavy. She never called me for help. I was too quiet, too soft-spoken, easy to overlook. I remember standing there, my hand on the doorknob, waiting for someone to notice. Maybe my dad, who'd be leaving for work soon. Or my mom, who always checked if I'd fed the cat. But no one did. I stepped outside. The air was cold and sharp, almost like it was daring me to take that first breath as a woman no one cared to stop. My car was old, a silver sedan that groaned whenever it started. The passenger seat was still full of grocery bags from last week, snacks my mom liked, a box of tea she once said she'd try when she had time. I looked at them and laughed under my breath. That's what I'd been doing my whole life, waiting for her to have time. When the engine finally turned over, I felt something strange. Not fear. Not guilt. Just stillness. The kind that settles in after you've cried so much, there's nothing left to say. The drive out of town was quiet. I kept the radio off. I didn't want words or music filling the silence I'd finally earned. I passed the same grocery store where Mom used to send me alone because, your brother's too busy. The same school where I once waited an hour in the rain because Dad forgot to pick me up. Every building felt like a ghost of the person I used to be. Always waiting to be remembered. When I crossed the state line, I didn't feel free. Not yet. Freedom doesn't show up like fireworks. It's more like a slow exhale after years of holding your breath. I ended up in Tennessee by accident. My car broke down just outside Knoxville, and it felt too exhausting to go any farther. I found a small apartment over a laundromat, 1 bedroom, peeling paint, and a window that rattled when the wind blew. It was perfect. The landlord, an older woman named Mrs. Green, handed me the keys and asked, "Anyone coming to help you move in, honey?" I shook my head. She smiled kindly like she understood more than I said. Well, that's all right. Sometimes quiet is good for the soul. That night, I lay on the floor surrounded by boxes and the faint hum of laundry machines downstairs. For the first time in my life, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. The days started to blend together. I found a job at a diner down the street. Nothing fancy, just breakfast rushes and black coffee served to regulars who tipped in crumpled dollar bills. They called me sweetheart and darlin', and noticed when I changed my hairstyle or wore new shoes. That kind of noticing felt strange at first. Too kind. Too easy. But it also reminded me of what I'd been missing all those years. At the end of each shift, I'd walk home past a thrift store and a small church that rang its bell at 6 o'clock sharp. The sound made me pause every time. Not because it reminded me of faith, but because it reminded me someone somewhere still cared enough to keep time. Weeks passed. Then months. The holidays came and went. No calls. No messages. Not even a Merry Christmas text from my mom. I told myself I didn't care, but when I saw families laughing over breakfast at the diner, something inside me twisted. I'd pretend to focus on the orders, but my eyes always wandered toward them. A dad ruffling his daughter's hair. A mom checking her son's plate. All those small things that said, "I see you." That's all I'd ever wanted, to be seen. One night, while closing up the diner, my coworker Denise asked, "You got family around here?" I smiled weakly. "No. I used to, though." She gave me that look older women give when they sense something unspoken. Sometimes family's just the folks who show up for you. Blood doesn't make people kind. Her words stayed with me. That night I sat by my apartment window, listening to the distant sound of rain against the glass. I whispered to myself, maybe she's right. Maybe I didn't lose a family. I just left the wrong one behind. Still, the ache didn't leave. Every Sunday morning, I wake up expecting my phone to buzz. Maybe my mom finally noticed. Maybe my brother realized I was gone. But there was nothing. Just the dull glow of a silent screen. So I started writing letters I never sent. Dear Mom, today I made pancakes just like you used to. Dear Dad, I changed my car tires by myself. Dear Ben, I still remember when you promised to call me after college. You never did. I kept those letters in a shoebox under my bed. I told myself it was closure, but really it was hope. Hope that maybe one day they'd care enough to ask where I'd gone. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a quiet Tuesday. I'd just gotten off my shift and was folding my apron when my phone buzzed with a group text notification. I almost ignored it. I didn't recognize the number at first. But curiosity got the better of me. And there it was. A message from my family's old group chat. For a split second I froze. My heart raced. Maybe they finally noticed I was gone. Maybe they missed me. Maybe. But no. The message was short, casual, and cruel in the way only careless words can be. My sister had written, "We should probably invite Natalie, I guess. If she's still alive." Followed by a laughing emoji. I stared at the screen, unable to move. The sounds around me, the clinking of dishes, the hum of the diner lights, blurred into nothing. My chest tightened, but not with sadness this time. It was something colder. I wasn't angry they forgot. I was angry they remembered me like that. That night I didn't sleep. I just sat by the window, the blue light of my phone still glowing on the table. My mind replayed every memory I tried to bury. The moments I'd been the afterthought, the forgotten one, the backup plan. All those years of silence, and they still turned me into a joke. But somewhere between that heartbreak and exhaustion, a strange calm settled over me. I realized the silence I'd given them wasn't punishment, it was protection. And now maybe it was time to show them what silence had turned me into. Not through anger, not through revenge, but through presence. I didn't know yet that this decision, to show up at the wedding they thought I'd never attend, would change everything. But that night, as I finally turned off my phone, I whispered the same words that had carried me through every lonely day since I left home. They didn't notice when I left, but they'll notice when I walk back in. The words glowed on my screen long after the diner went dark. We should probably invite Natalie, I guess. If she's still alive. A laughing emoji followed, small and harmless on the surface, but somehow louder than any scream. I stared at it until the phone dimmed, until my reflection stared back from the glass. Eyes tired, face blank, lips pressed tight as if silence could keep the pain from spilling out. The strange part was how calm I felt. No crying, no shaking. Just that deep, cold quiet that comes when something inside you finally breaks for good. Outside, the parking lot lights flickered. Denise was locking up the diner. "You good, hon?" she called through the window. I forced a smile and nodded. "Yeah, just tired." She gave me a wave and drove off, her headlights cutting across the dark asphalt. I stood there for a long time, the phone still heavy in my hand, the text replaying in my mind like an echo that refused to fade. It wasn't just a message. It was a reminder that I'd been gone almost a year, and no one had noticed until it was inconvenient. When I finally got home, the air in my apartment felt different. Colder somehow. The quiet that once felt comforting now pressed against my chest. I sat at the kitchen counter scrolling back through the group chat. The messages before that one were just as casual: plans for the wedding, catering choices, a debate about whether the reception should have a live band or a DJ. Then came my sister's message. Then laughter from my brother's fiancé. "Oh, stop, you know she won't come anyway." A few heart emojis followed. My mom's name popped up briefly. "Let's not argue. Just send the invite." That was it. No one said anything about me being gone. No one asked where I'd been, if I was okay, or why they hadn't heard from me. Just send the invite. I set the phone down and poured a glass of water, though my hands trembled so much half of it spilled on the counter. The absurdity of it hit me. I'd moved across states, built a new life, and my entire existence had just been reduced to a wedding guest list. I leaned against the counter and whispered to the empty room. "Still alive, huh?" The words sounded strange coming out loud, like I was testing if my voice still worked. It did. It just didn't sound like mine anymore. The next morning I tried to brush it off. I went to work, took orders, smiled at regulars. But everything felt offbeat. When the bell above the diner door jingled, I'd glance up, half expecting someone familiar to walk in. My brain kept tricking me. Faces that looked like my brother, a laugh that sounded like Mom's. Each time it happened, my chest tightened. Around noon, Denise noticed. "You're off today," she said, wiping down the counter. "Didn't sleep much," I answered. "Bad dreams." "Bad memories," I said before I could stop myself. She didn't press, just handed me a fresh cup of coffee. "Then drink this and make new ones." That night, I couldn't stop rereading the message. It wasn't about the words anymore. It was the weight behind them, the casual cruelty, the years of silence that made it possible for them to joke like that. I thought about calling my mom, then immediately felt foolish. What would I even say? "Hey, I saw the message you weren't supposed to send." That wasn't my style. I wasn't the dramatic daughter. I was the quiet one, the helper, the one who didn't cause trouble. But maybe that's exactly why no one ever listened. 2 days passed. Then a wedding invitation showed up in my mailbox. It was addressed in my mother's neat handwriting, the same looping letter she used on Christmas cards. For a moment I just held it, staring at the Tennessee postmark. At least she'd remembered where I was. Or maybe she just checked the old return address label I used to use for family mail. Inside, there was a glossy card with embossed gold letters. "Benjamin Carter and Emily Rhodes invite you to celebrate their wedding." I laughed bitterly. My brother's fiancée was also named Emily. How fitting. I'd been replaced by another Emily. One people actually wanted around. The RSVP card slipped out and fell to the floor. I stared at it for a long time. Attend or decline. 2 boxes, 1 choice. That night I dreamt of home. Not the house itself, but the sounds. The low murmur of my parents talking behind closed doors. The clatter of my brother's laughter down the hallway. My own footsteps, always careful not to interrupt. In the dream I walked into the kitchen, and they all looked at me like they didn't recognize who I was. I woke up sweating, heart pounding. The clock read 3:42 a.m. The city outside was still asleep, but my thoughts weren't. Something inside me whispered that maybe this was it, the moment I stopped hiding from what they'd done, from how they made me feel. Not for them. For me. The next day, I sat at the diner during my break, RSVP card in my bag. Denise slid into the booth across from me. "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders," she said. "Feels like it," I admitted. "Family stuff." I nodded, then told her everything, the message, the silence, the wedding. She listened without interrupting, her expression soft but serious. When I finished, she said, "So what are you gonna do?" "I don't know." She took a sip of her coffee. Sometimes the best answer is the one they don't expect. Her words hung in the air long after she went back to work. That evening I took a long walk through my neighborhood. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink. Children were riding bikes, neighbors chatting across fences. Normal life. Peaceful life. The kind I'd always wanted. But peace felt hollow when you knew someone had rewritten your story without asking. I stopped at a park bench and sat down. My hands fidgeted with the RSVP card I'd tucked into my pocket. I turned it over, tracing the raised edges with my thumb. Attend. Decline. If I declined, the silence would continue. If I attended, I'd have to face all the things I'd spent a year trying to escape. I thought of that message again. If she's still alive. Maybe I'd go, not to prove I was alive to them, but to remind myself I'd survived without them. Back home, I wrote a letter I never planned to send. "Dear Mom, I got your invitation. I saw the message too. I'm not angry. I'm just done pretending that your silence didn't hurt. I left because I needed to. I'm not coming back to make you feel guilty. I'm coming back because I finally can." I folded the letter and slipped it into the RSVP envelope. Instead of mailing it, I placed it in the shoebox under my bed, next to all the others. But this one felt different. It wasn't for closure. It was a declaration. The following week, the wedding plans seemed to follow me everywhere. Social media posts, pictures of dresses, tagged photos of my brother smiling beside his fiancée. Each image hit like a reminder of where I didn't belong. But somewhere between frustration and fatigue, a strange thing happened. I stopped feeling like the victim. The hurt was still there. Yes, but underneath it, a quiet confidence was forming. I wasn't the same Natalie who'd left that town. I wasn't the girl who waited for permission to exist. And maybe that was what scared me the most, that facing them might not break me anymore. One afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Hello. Is this Natalie Carter? The voice was familiar but hesitant. Yeah, who's this? This is, Mom. I froze. Her tone was nervous, almost cautious. Did you get Ben's invitation? I did. Good. We weren't sure if you'd want to come. Her words stumbled over themselves, and for the first time, I heard uncertainty in her voice. Not guilt but discomfort. She wasn't used to not knowing what I'd do next. I haven't decided, I said. All right, she replied softly. Just let us know. It'd mean a lot to Ben. A small part of me wanted to ask why now, but I didn't. I simply said, I'll think about it. After we hung up, I sat there staring at the wall. It wasn't much, but that call told me something they noticed. Too late, but still they noticed. That night the rain came again. Heavy this time, drumming against my window like it was trying to wake me up. I made a cup of tea and curled up on the couch, letting the quiet fill the room. I imagined the wedding, the music, the lights, the polite smiles. I imagined my sister's face when she saw me walk in. I imagined my mom's hesitation, my brother's surprise. For the first time, the thought didn't make me anxious. It made me steady, because the message that was meant to belittle me had done the opposite. It reminded me that I'd been invisible because I allowed it. And now I didn't have to anymore. As I turned off the lamp, I whispered to the darkness, You wanted to know if I'm still alive? You'll find out soon enough. The phone lay silent beside me, its glow finally gone. But in that silence, something new stirred. Not pain, not fear, just purpose. And that changed everything. The rain had finally stopped, but its memory lingered. In the scent of damp concrete, in the faint mist that curled around the edges of my window. I sat there long after the storm had passed, staring at the half-packed suitcase on my bed. The decision was made before I even realized it. I was going back. Not because I owed them anything. Not because I wanted forgiveness. But because I needed to face the silence that had shaped me, and finally end it on my own terms. I threw a few clothes into the bag. Nothing fancy, just enough for a few days. My hands shook slightly as I zipped it up. Every sound in the apartment suddenly felt louder. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the soft patter of leftover rain dripping from the fire escape. When I picked up my phone, the lock screen still showed that old message thread, the one that had started all this. I stared at it one last time, then turned the phone off. I didn't need to read it again. This time I was going to speak for myself. The bus station was quiet that morning. The kind of quiet that hums beneath fluorescent lights and half-awake travelers. The air smelled like coffee and wet asphalt. I bought a ticket to Knoxville, my hometown, and took a seat near the window. The ride would take 8 hours. 8 hours to think. 8 hours to question if I was doing the right thing. As the bus rumbled to life, the city faded behind me like an old photograph losing color. Buildings blurred into trees, and trees into rolling fields of green. With every mile, a memory surfaced. The first was of my dad teaching me how to drive down those same Tennessee backroads, his voice calm, his hand resting on the steering wheel just in case. The second was my mom sitting at the kitchen table, grading papers with a pencil tucked behind her ear. And the third, my brother laughing so hard he could barely breathe after I tripped during his graduation photos. Those moments used to define home for me. Now they felt like scenes from someone else's life. Somewhere around hour 3, the bus stopped for a break. I stepped outside, the warm southern air wrapping around me like an old blanket. There was a gas station nearby, the kind that sold everything from fried chicken to postcards. Inside, I grabbed a coffee and a bag of chips. The cashier, a woman about my age, smiled as she handed me my change. "Heading somewhere special?" she asked. I hesitated. "Home," I said finally. She grinned. "That can mean a lot of things." I nodded. "Yeah, it really can." Her words lingered as I got back on the bus. Home. The word didn't feel simple anymore. It carried too much nostalgia, ache, unfinished conversations. By the time the bus crossed the Tennessee border, the landscape had changed completely. The horizon was a soft watercolor of green hills, church steeples, and weathered barns. My stomach twisted with a strange mix of anticipation and dread. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. I didn't plan to. I wanted to see what it felt like to walk through that town again. Unannounced, unseen, like a ghost revisiting the living. When we finally pulled into Knoxville, the sky had already turned golden. I grabbed my bag and stepped onto the platform. The air smelled of honeysuckle and pavement, a scent that pulled me straight back to summers spent barefoot in the yard. Called a cab. The driver was talkative, asking where I was headed. Maplewood, I said quietly. He chuckled. Nice area. You visiting family? Something like that. As we drove, I pressed my forehead against the window. The familiar streets appeared one by one, each corner tugging at something buried deep. The bakery that used to give free cookies to kids. The park where I scraped my knees learning to ride a bike. And finally Maplewood Lane. The cab slowed as we turned onto it. My childhood home came into view. A two-story house with white shutters and a porch swing that hadn't changed a bit. The flower beds were overgrown, but the wind chime still hung by the door, tinkling softly in the evening air. For a moment I couldn't move. The sight of it was both comforting and unbearable. So many nights I dreamed of walking back through that door. So many times I told myself I didn't need to. Now that I was here, both versions of me seemed to collide. The girl who left and the woman who returned. I paid the driver, took a deep breath and stepped out. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes as I walked up the driveway. My heart pounded with every step. I wasn't sure what I expected, to see them standing there waiting, to feel something familiar, something safe. Instead, all I felt was the weight of the years I'd missed. Before I could knock, the door opened. It was my sister, Emma. Her hair was shorter now, but her eyes widened the same way they used to when she was caught off guard. Natalie, she breathed. I froze. Hi, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. She blinked a few times before stepping aside. You're really here? I guess I am. She didn't hug me, just stared, half in disbelief, half in uncertainty. I couldn't blame her. After all, I'd vanished without warning. Inside, the house smelled the same. Vanilla candles, detergent, faint traces of coffee. It was eerie how familiar it all was. Mom was in the living room sorting through wedding decorations. When she looked up, the color drained from her face. Mom, I said softly. For a second, she didn't move. Then she stood, the tissue paper still in her hands. Natalie. Yeah. The silence stretched between us, thick, fragile, and full of everything we hadn't said. Then she crossed the room and wrapped her arms around me. It was awkward at first, like hugging a stranger who smelled faintly of memories. But eventually I felt her hand press against my back, trembling slightly. I didn't think you'd come, she whispered. I almost didn't. When she pulled back, her eyes were glossy but calm. Your brother's going to be so happy to see you. I nodded, though part of me wasn't sure if that was true. That evening was quiet. Emma offered to make tea, and Mom went back to arranging ribbons, avoiding eye contact but asking polite questions. How work was, where I lived now, if I was seeing anyone. It was all surface talk. Polished. Careful. Like we were trying to rebuild a bridge one plank at a time without daring to look down. At one point, Emma glanced at me and said softly, You really hurt Mom when you left. I looked at her. She hurt me first. The words slipped out before I could soften them. The air froze for a moment. Mom's hands stopped moving. I stood up. I need some air. Outside, the night was warm and still. Crickets chirped somewhere in the dark. I sat on the porch steps and closed my eyes, letting the silence wash over me. I remembered the last night I spent here, the argument that had driven me out, the look of disappointment in Mom's eyes, the exhaustion in my brother's voice. I'd walked away thinking distance would heal it all. But some wounds don't fade. They just wait for you to come back and face them. The front door creaked open behind me. It was Mom. She sat beside me, leaving a small space between us. I wasn't sure you'd ever want to see us again, she said quietly. I wasn't sure either. We sat there for a while, neither of us speaking. Finally, she said, I know you saw that message. I turned to her, startled. You do. Your sister told me. She didn't mean for it to sound the way it did. I let out a bitter laugh. It sounded exactly how it was meant to sound. She sighed. We didn't realize how much we'd pushed you away until you were gone. That's the thing, I said, voice trembling. You didn't even notice I was gone. Her eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't stop now. I kept waiting for someone to call to ask why I left. But the phone never rang. I was scared, she whispered. Scared you wouldn't pick up. We sat in silence, the truth hanging between us. Heavy, unchangeable. Later that night, I lay awake in the guest room. The ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, creaking with each turn. From down the hall came faint laughter. Emma on the phone, probably with her friends. It was strange being back in this space, surrounded by things that once felt like pieces of me. The photo frames, the chipped nightstand, the old posters still tacked to the wall. I realized then that maybe I hadn't come back to reclaim the past. Maybe I came to finally let it go. The next morning I woke early. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of Mom making coffee. I walked to the window and watched the sunrise spill over the neighborhood. There was a peace in that moment. A fragile, tentative peace. But I knew this was only the beginning. The wedding was still days away, and with it, the confrontation I'd been avoiding most, my brother. Still, as I zipped up my jacket and stepped outside, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Strength. Because the road back to what I left behind wasn't just about returning. It was about proving, to them and to myself, that I'd survived the silence. And now I was ready to be heard. The morning of the wedding arrived with a strange stillness, like the air itself was holding its breath. I stood in front of the small mirror in my guest room, smoothing out the wrinkles on my simple blue dress. It wasn't new or fancy, just me. Outside, the faint sound of laughter drifted in from the backyard. I could hear Emma's voice, cheerful and busy, giving orders about flowers and chairs. I glanced at my reflection one last time. My hair was pinned loosely, my face calm, but my stomach felt like it was tied in knots. They didn't expect me to show up today, not really. Even after I'd been home for a few days, I'd caught the glances, the uncertain smiles, the quiet whispering. My mother kept saying things like, "You don't have to come if you're not comfortable." But I was coming. Not to cause a scene. Not to prove a point. Just to be seen finally as more than the one who disappeared. The backyard was transformed. White folding chairs lined up in perfect rows. Garlands of eucalyptus and wildflowers draped along the archway. A soft melody floated through the air from a Bluetooth speaker hidden behind the bushes. It wasn't a grand event, just a modest, heartfelt wedding. The kind people in small towns loved. Guests were beginning to arrive. Friends from church, old neighbors, a few faces I hadn't seen since high school. Some gave me polite smiles, others did a double take, clearly surprised to see me. I kept my head high, clutching the small purse in my hands like a shield. Emma came over, adjusting her hair as she whispered, "You look nice, Nat." "Thanks," I said, smiling faintly. "So do you." Her eyes softened for a second before she was pulled away by another bridesmaid. I watched her go, realizing that beneath the polite small talk, there was something unspoken. A mix of guilt, affection, and uncertainty that none of us knew how to untangle. The ceremony started just after noon. The sun broke through the clouds, casting everything in a soft golden glow. The crowd quieted as my brother, Aaron, walked to the front. He looked older than I remembered, broader shoulders, a few lines near his eyes, but that same easy smile. My breath caught for a moment. That smile used to make me feel safe. When the music shifted and his bride, Lily, appeared at the end of the aisle, the crowd turned in admiration. She looked radiant. Simple white lace, soft curls, the kind of beauty that didn't need perfection. I felt a pang, not of jealousy but of something heavier. This was what family should have felt like: joy, connection, presence. But as I sat there, surrounded by the people who once felt like home, I realized I was still on the outside looking in. During the vows, I caught Aaron glancing at me once. Just a flicker of recognition, quickly masked by the emotion of the moment. I wondered if he even knew what to say to me anymore. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the crowd erupted into applause. I clapped too, smiling genuinely despite the ache inside. After the ceremony, people mingled around the backyard, drinks in hand, laughter filling the air. Tables were set with small centerpieces of daisies and candles. I found a seat near the edge, quietly watching. A woman sitting nearby leaned toward me. You must be Natalie, she said kindly. I've heard about you. I smiled politely. I hope only the good things. She chuckled. Mostly confusion. No one could believe you just packed up and left. I took a sip of my drink, the bubbles tickling my throat. Sometimes leaving is the only way to be noticed. She studied me for a moment, unsure how to respond. Then she just nodded and turned back to her plate. It was halfway through lunch when Aaron finally approached me. He looked hesitant, holding a plate in one hand, his tie slightly loosened. Hey, he said softly. I looked up. Hey. He sat down beside me, exhaling. You came. I said I would. Yeah, I just wasn't sure you meant it. We sat in silence for a beat. The sound of clinking glasses and chatter filled the space between us. You look good, he said finally. So do you. Married life suits you already. He smiled awkwardly, then stared at his hands. I didn't mean for things to get this weird between us. Neither did I said quietly. He looked up. You know that message. Don't, I interrupted, my voice steady but firm. Don't try to explain it. You all said what you meant. His jaw tightened. We were just frustrated. You disappeared. And no one thought to ask why? He looked at me, guilt flashing in his eyes. I didn't think you wanted to be found. I swallowed hard. You didn't even try, Aaron. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he nodded slowly, eyes glistening. You're right. I didn't. And I'm sorry. The words hit me harder than I expected. I dreamed of hearing them for years, but they sounded different out loud, tired, genuine, almost fragile. The afternoon wore on and the air grew warmer. Kids ran barefoot across the grass, their laughter mingling with the soft hum of conversation. Someone turned up the music, and couples began to dance beneath the string lights. I sat back, watching it all unfold, feeling both part of it and separate from it. Then Mom came over holding 2 glasses of lemonade. She handed one to me and sat beside me on the edge of the bench. Thank you for coming, she said softly. I nodded. You didn't think I would. She smiled faintly. Honestly? No. But I'm glad you did. We watched as Aaron and Lily swayed to their first dance. The way he looked at her, gentle, full of love, reminded me of the boy who used to protect me from everything. Do you remember when he used to build those little forts for us in the backyard? I asked. Mom smiled. He always made you the lookout. Yeah, I said quietly. And somehow I still didn't see it coming. She looked at me puzzled. See what coming? The distance, I said simply. How we all stopped showing up for each other. Her eyes softened. Families mess up, Natalie. Sometimes worse than they mean to. Yeah, I whispered. But sometimes they don't even notice until someone's gone. As evening settled, fairy lights twinkled across the yard. The speeches began, light-hearted, full of stories and laughter. When Aaron's turn came, he took the microphone, smiling at his new wife. He thanked everyone for coming, for believing in love, for second chances. And then unexpectedly his gaze drifted toward me. And for family, he said, his voice steady. Even the ones who teach us how to be better, by walking away. The crowd clapped, unaware of the weight in his words. But I knew. He was speaking to me. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't look away. For the first time in years I felt seen. After the toasts, I slipped away toward the edge of the property where the trees met the fence line. The music faded into the background, replaced by the soft chirping of crickets. I leaned against the fence, letting the quiet wrap around me. The night air smelled like honeysuckle and fresh-cut grass. Footsteps approached behind me. I turned to see Aaron again, hands in his pockets. You're really leaving tomorrow? Yeah, I said. I've got work. He nodded. I figured. We stood there for a long time saying nothing. The moon hung low above the trees. Then he said, You know, when you left, I thought you were selfish. I told myself you didn't care. But now I get it. You needed space. We made you feel like a stranger in your own family. I blinked back tears. It wasn't just space I needed, Aaron. It was peace. He nodded slowly. Well, I hope you found it. I'm starting to, I said softly. He hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket, a small photo worn and creased. It was the 3 of us, him, me, Emma, standing by the lake as kids. I kept this, he said, handing it to me. In case you ever came back. I took it, my throat tightening. Thank you. When the music started up again, we walked back together. Mom was laughing with some guests, Emma dancing with a glass of champagne in her hand. It was loud and imperfect and real. I realized, standing there under the lights, that maybe family wasn't about erasing the past. Maybe it was about finally facing it, mess and all. Aaron squeezed my shoulder lightly before walking off to join his new wife. I stayed where I was, looking at the photo in my hand. We looked so young in it. Untouched by disappointment, untouched by distance. I slipped it into my purse and took a deep breath. For the first time since coming home, I didn't feel invisible. They hadn't expected me to show up, but I had. Not as the forgotten sister. Not as the one who left. But as the woman who finally came back, not for them, but for herself. As the night drew to an end, I stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the newlyweds leave through a tunnel of sparklers. The lights shimmered against the darkness, laughter echoing into the distance. I didn't cry. I just smiled. Because this time the silence I carried wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. And it was mine. The car engine hummed softly as I drove away from the house, the string lights still twinkling behind me like tiny constellations losing their power. I didn't turn up the radio. I wanted the road to keep my thoughts company without adding words I didn't need. The night air felt cool against my face through the cracked window. Every mile loosened something inside me that had been tight for years. I did not feel triumphant. I felt steady. That steadiness surprised me more than any apology or stare at the wedding. It was not a loud, sudden joy. It was a soft, slow settling like pebbles falling into place. I watched the town signs scroll by, Maplewood, then Highway 4, and something unclenched. At a gas station an hour out, I stopped. I pumped gas, bought a bottle of water, and stood outside for a while, leaning with my back against the car. A teenager walked past with an ice cream cone, laughing on the phone. The ordinary life around me made the night feel less like a stage and more like real life again. That was new. Real life. Not the performance I'd wrapped myself in when I stayed too long and tried too hard to be invisible. My phone buzzed in my purse. I almost didn't check it. When I did, it was Aaron. Text me when you get home safe. Thanks for coming. Short. Simple. A small attempt at bridge building. I typed back, I'm on my way. And I meant it, not as a promise to return, but as a note that I was taking care of myself. I hit send, then set the phone face down on the passenger seat. My hands felt lighter than they had in months. By the time I pulled into the small parking lot outside my apartment building in Tennessee, dawn was just beginning to nudge the sky. I carried my overnight bag up the stairs and unlocked my door. The apartment smelled faintly of detergent and toast. Denise must have been up early, making breakfast for the staff. I lay on my bed for a while, looking at the ceiling, listening to the world waking up. The quiet was a comfort now, not a wound. Later that morning, Denise knocked and came in with 2 cups of coffee. She sat on the edge of my bed and handed me one. How's the heart? She asked lightly. She always knew how to say things without making them heavier. Full, I said, surprised at the accuracy of the word. Not sad, just full. She smiled. Good. That's a proper word. She sipped her coffee. So, are you staying put or going to run off again on us? I laughed. No running off this time. I learned a few things. I thought of the letters I'd tucked away, the photo Aaron gave me. I thought of my mother's voice, soft and uncertain on the porch. Those things wouldn't change the past. But they were part of what I carried forward. A week later, life settled into a new rhythm. I kept working at the diner, but now I took more shifts and started picking up small pieces of extra work. Closing the place alone, helping the owner with bookkeeping at night. Money was tight, but it was honest and mine. I began to save a little each paycheck. A small steady climb towards something I'd never let myself plan for before. I found a part-time bookkeeping class at the community college and signed up, feeling the thrill of learning again like the buzz of a new light switch. Neighbors who once passed me with a nod now stopped to say hello. Mrs. Green invited me over for baked ziti and bad television on Sundays. I had become someone people noticed, and their noticing wasn't fragile or awkward. It was the kind that came with asking, "How are you really?" and meaning it. One evening, as autumn arrived with a cooler wind, I took a walk to the park. The leaves were turning, small fires of red and gold scattered around. I sat on the bench, fingers warmed by a paper cup of coffee, and looked at the photo Aaron had given me. The three of us by the lake, younger, sunburned, grinning with the kind of reckless trust kids have. I held the picture and realized I didn't need permission to keep that memory. It was mine by right. A message came in from my mother that day. "Hope you're settling back in okay. We'd like to have you over for dinner sometime." The words were careful, like someone stepping onto fresh paint. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I could have written something sharp and decisive. I could have let anger be loud. Instead I wrote, "Maybe next month." It was neither a full acceptance nor a rejection. It was time. The next month arrived with small things. I taught myself to cook a new dish, spaghetti with a sauce from a cookbook Denise lent me. It turned out better than I expected. I bought a small houseplant and named it June, because it seemed stubborn and patient. I began waking up earlier not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There was a sense of ownership to my days that felt like walking into sunlight after standing in shade for too long. Money remained an issue. I still had to budget, clip coupons occasionally, and say no to expensive dinners. But I learned the satisfaction of paying my own bills on time. I felt the small, fierce pride of independence that wasn't meant to spite anyone. Just to prove to myself that I could. Aaron called sometimes. At first their conversations were stilted, mostly about logistics like whether I'd need a ride to the airport if I ever wanted to visit. Then slowly they became looser, peppered with memories of childhood pranks and old recipes my mother used to make. He apologized once more, in a voice that trembled but was honest. I accepted it not because I had to, but because it felt right to let it go. Forgiveness, I learned, was less like erasing and more like choosing to carry less weight. There was a twist one cold evening that made me laugh out loud. A package arrived for me, no return address. Inside was a small framed note, scrawled in a hand that could only be my sister's. For Natalie. For when you need proof you were loved even when it didn't feel like it. Along with the note were pressed wildflowers and a tiny hand-knitted scarf. I wrapped the scarf around my throat and felt warmth that had nothing to do with the wool. Emma came by the diner a week later. She hugged me like someone coming back from a long trip. "I miss you," she said, surprising herself with the honesty. I told her I missed her too. We sat in the back booth and talked in a way we hadn't in years, about small things at first, exam schedules, neighborhood gossip, and then deeper things. She admitted how guilty she felt about the message, and how angry she'd been at herself for not reaching out sooner. We cried. We laughed. It wasn't clean and it wasn't simple, but it was real. The most important change was internal. I stopped measuring my worth by how much attention I received. I stopped shrinking to fit other people's expectations. Instead, I grew in little ways, saying yes to a new friend who invited me to a pottery class, volunteering for the local food drive, signing up to read at the library for Children's Hour. These acts weren't grand. They were quiet, ordinary, and steady. But together, they formed a new life that felt both anchored and flexible. One morning, as winter teased the town with the first frost, I received a short text from Aaron. "Mom asked if you would let us use that picture in the family album." He attached a small photo of the framed lake picture, now cleaned up and put among others on a shelf. My stomach warmed. I replied simply, "Okay." Not a triumph, not a surrender. A small calm yes. I started signing my name a little differently on official forms. Natalie M. Carter became Natalie M. Carter on one particular paperwork for a small bookkeeping job I landed. The slight variation felt like a private joke and a declaration at once. I wasn't hiding. I was stepping into a self I had chosen, not one chosen for me. Sometimes, late at night, I would take my letters out from under the bed and read them. They were honest in a way the spoken word had often not been. I folded them back carefully and realized they were artifacts of my transformation, not anchors. I kept a couple of them in a new box labeled Small Truths. It sat on my bookshelf next to my plant, near the cookbook and the framed lake photo. One afternoon the phone rang. It was Mom. She said simply, "I'm making your favorite chicken pot pie. Would you like some? I'll bring it over." For a second I thought about the hurt, the months of silence. Then I thought of the pie, the soft smell of butter crust, the way my mother folded the edges just so. I said, "Yes, I'd like that." When she arrived, the pie steaming and the porch light on, we sat with cups of tea and shared a quiet meal. We did not unravel everything in one sitting. That hadn't changed. But we were present. That presence felt now like progress. Months passed. Holidays came and went with smaller dramas and larger forgiveness. I took vacations with friends instead of waiting for a family call. I learned to be content with less spectacle and more substance. I taught myself to appreciate small victories. A completed class, a paid-off credit card, a new set of dishes bought with my own money. I grew used to the fact that moving on did not mean moving away from memory. It meant holding memories without letting them hurt me the way they used to. It meant accepting an imperfect family without allowing their failures to define my happiness. It meant building rituals that were mine: Thursday morning runs, Saturday baking experiments, phone calls with Denise that never lasted less than an hour. One night, sitting on my porch with a mug of tea and a blanket, I thought about the simple revenge I had once imagined. I had pictured dramatic confrontations, sharp words, a dramatic reveal. Instead, the revenge had been quieter and better. Living fully. The life I had built required no explanation and no audience. It thrived on small details: an evening spent reading, a friend who brought over soup when I was sick, a job where my name was called with respect. When someone asks me now what moving on meant, I tell them it meant learning to be my own witness. It meant turning away from the habit of shrinking and toward the habit of showing up for myself. It meant reattaching the pieces of a life and making sure they fit the person I had become. It meant letting go of the need to be seen by those who only glanced, and choosing instead to be visible to those who made the effort. The wind shifted. The leaves on the trees outside my window whispered. I sipped my tea and smiled. There was still room for imperfect family, for hesitant love, for slow reconnections. There was also room for me to be small, to be loud, to be ordinary, and to be enough. And in that quiet certainty, I found the last thing I'd been chasing all along: peace.